Bog muzičari i dobrodošli natrag. Došlo je vrijeme da počnemo pričati o svim ozbiljnim temama koje muzički biznis znače. I za početak sam pripremio serijal kratkih videića koji su izrezani iz jednog dužeg razgovora kojega sam nedavno snimio sa mojim mentorom, osobom koja me naučila najviše o muzičkom biznisu, o muzičkom marketingu i općenito o tom nekom svijetu o kojem nisam imao pojma, koliko ne znam, prije nego što sam počeo učiti od njega i od njegove firme koja se zove Indepreneur, ali o tome ćete saznati u ovom prvom videu. Prva tema o kojoj smo razgovarali je muzička industrija općenito, zašto funkcionira kako funkcionira, zašto to funkcioniranje neće možda još dugo tako moći opstati i kako se mi možemo pripremiti da nas to sve ne ulovi nespremnima. I moj sugovornik će vam objasniti kako on u svojoj firmi sa svojim timom pomaže nezavisnim i ne toliko nezavisnim muzičarima da postignu vrlo, vrlo pozitivne rezultate u svojem muzičkom biznisu. Pa krenimo. So we're here with Mr. Circa Lemairom. He's the CEO and co-founder of Indepreneur LLC. That's what it's called in America. And he is here to talk about what they do in their company for independent and not so independent musicians from all around the world. And I'm glad to say that I consider him my mentor, and I consider him the reason that I'm doing all that it is I'm doing. So, Circa, tell us about your company, about what you did for artists so far, what was the big idea, and where you are now.
So Indepreneur, we are a company primarily focused on increasing the market share of indie artists in the music industry. Kind of back in 2016 rather, I had noticed that digital marketing that's practiced for online companies, online businesses, is not really well practiced in the music industry. Kind of any marketing outside of major brand marketing is not really well practiced in the music industry. And I thought about how can we bring these direct response marketing tactics and strategies over to artists, and spent a lot of time 2015 to 2017, I spent a lot of time working with one-on-one with artists from my local studio here in Florida, and found some success, started, having replayable strategies, things I could do with kind of any artist that I was working with. So we started to codify like a set of recommendations, a set of processes that we can use to grow an indie artist fan base and to monetize that fan base. And so eventually the demand for me to work one-on-one with artists locally grew so large that I decided to kind of take it online. And so in 2017, Indepreneur started with just a training course and an online community that was sort of dedicated to growing a fan base, but over time sort of developed out more and more trainings for all of the different strategies that I kind of knew how to run. And then members of our community eventually started showing and proving that they could do really well with those strategies and even modify them and kind of make their own special way of doing things. And so we ended up bringing on members of our community into the team when it became appropriate. And sort of it's grown from there. We have a large community. We have an agency now where we run these strategies for larger artists in terms of monetizing them through direct-to-fan sales. We have a coaching program where we work one-on-one with indie artists to kind of guide them through being their own marketing. And then we obviously have our training side of the business, which is 1,000 plus indie artists kind of working with us every day and every month to impact their own music careers. And we now have a team of about somewhere from 9 to 11 people. Because we have some contractors, we have some people who help us out who aren't employees, but it's a pretty big team now. And they're all former or current community members. So kind of grew organically as people started popping out in our community and showing that they were advanced at this. We would bring them on to work at the agency, and then, you know, they became superstars in their own right. So yeah, that's kind of the history of the company. That's what we do. We teach indie artists digital marketing, and we do digital marketing for larger artists.
All right, great. So firstly, I'd like to talk to you about like the broader state of the music industry and what you think about it, and why it's failing as we know it, and how it will maybe change in the future.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to plug in my own feelings about this. I think the major problem is that it's a business model that isn't sustainable in the long run, or won't be in the long run, and that it has to become artist-centric, not business-centric, not industry-centric, not big business-centric. So not being B2B, that artists think of themselves as a business that has to talk to other businesses, but talking directly to their fans and monetizing that fan base. Yeah. I'm kind of regurgitating what I heard from you and from other sources, but it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, and I want to hear what you think about it. Maybe you have some new things that you know that I don't.
I would say that the music industry, you know, before, I don't know if I want to go all the way back to the beginning here, but basically, music is an intellectual property. It's an idea that we charge money for because we own the idea. But it didn't used to be the case that you could own ideas. Back in the days of early economics thought, there were guys like Adam Smith who kind of said that property is this real tangible thing. We combine nature with our labor and we get a product, and that is property, and you can own that. But can you own something that comes out of your brain? Not really. And then in the I want to say the 1600s, Britain decided, when the printing press was developed and you could print books, you could get lots of books out there really quickly. The British monarchy was worried about that. They were like, oh shit, now like things that are critical of us can be printed and distributed. We can't control the narrative. People can dissent from us. So they made it illegal to print books unless you had a license from royalty. And that's where the term royalties comes from. It's actually a derivative of the fact that royalty used to decide who could distribute intellectual property. And so the very first copyrights are actually a form of censorship. It's a little interesting fact. But anyways, we developed this idea of intellectual property. You can own ideas. Normally, originally, it was a way to prevent the wrong ideas from coming out. So it was never really meant to protect artists. And before that, artists made money. People like, you know, famous composers like Beethoven and Mozart made money by patronage. So, you know, a wealthy landowner would pay them to produce their works, and then they would make money off of the first performance. But after that, anyone could copy it, and anyone could put on their own orchestra using these symphonies. So it was monetized a very different way. But once we got these rights, these intellectual property rights, we could then force people to pay us to get access to our property, to get some of those rights. And thus the music industry grew. You take a song, you copyright it. So if someone records that song, they owe you a royalty. And then you can also create your own recording of it, and you can copyright that. And so really the music industry grew to make money off of these rights, not by charging for the rights themselves, but by putting that recorded music into a physical format like vinyl and then cassette and then CD, because there really was no way to reproduce and make accessible these recorded songs without some kind of physical media. And that all kind of changed in 1999 when Napster came out. And I mean, the MP3 was being developed as early as the early 90s. And the record industry was made aware of this, and people tried to sell major labels on the idea of the MP3, and they didn't want any part of it because they were comfortable selling CDs. But Napster kind of ate all that lunch, and then it became the case that you could not only take a song and record it for very cheaply, but then without putting it in a physical format that people had to buy the physical object from you, you could send it over the internet for almost no cost, almost instantly. And that completely demonetized the music thing, right? Once music became a file type, it became very, very hard to argue that you can charge money for it. But the music industry carried on thinking that they were in this business of taking an idea and then forcing people to pay for it through their intellectual property rights guaranteed to them by their government.
Well, that was practically because you didn't have any other way of doing it. They secured like their pipeline of getting the music to the people who want to hear it.
Yeah.
And basically put up a wall. Well, we call them gatekeepers, right?
Yeah.
They put up a gate and they said no one else can get on the radio, no one else can hear your music if it doesn't go through us. Like your
that's a
factory making a product, and you have to have a store that sells it because you don't want to sell it yourselves and legally can't.
Yeah.
Sell it yourselves.
Yeah. So aside from this intellectual property issue, which I think is fundamental to what's wrong with the music industry now, there is this issue of corruption in the music industry, and we can talk about that. But just to cap off this point, it's probably the case that it was never a good idea to treat ideas like property. And that's probably the fundamental issue with the music industry, because with the advent of computers, with the advent of the internet, it became impossible to enforce these imaginary intellectual property rights. Like, we don't actually, like, if I build a chair out of wood that I chop down, it's very easy to say that I own it. It's in my possession. I made it. I mix my labor with the environment to create it. It's hard to say it's not mine. But I don't own the idea of a chair. Right. And even if I made it like this special chair that's different from any other chair, well, the root concept is a chair, and that existed before me. So whatever modification I made to it still owes a debt of gratitude to whoever thought up the chair. So it becomes very hard to enforce ideas as property. And when we come up with a song, would we have come up with it that way if it wasn't for all the other songs that were ever created? It's very difficult to say. So I think the music industry's fundamental problem is that its annual revenue is comprised of the money made from enforcing intellectual property rights. That became very difficult to make money off of, starting with the late 1990s. It's only become more difficult ever since. And the music industry has continued to make less money than it ever did in its peak in 1999. So it's really failed to recover. And the only reason that it seems like it's recovering now is because the U.S. government is printing money, and there's just more money out there. So its real value is down from the late 90s, but in dollars, it's up. So everyone thinks, oh, it's coming out of its grave, but it's actually still down at its lows. And so I think insofar as the music industry continues to think of itself as a business that makes money off of enforcing intellectual property, it's going to have a really hard time because, at least before, these ideas were difficult to distribute. Like, maybe it's hard to create property rights out of them, but at least I can prevent people from stealing it because it's just hard to get. But now with the internet and computers, it's very easy to get. And so that whole thing comes into question and becomes very difficult. And so,
not to talk about AI yet. We're going to touch upon it later. Just to pour some salt on that wound. But
yeah.
I'd also like to talk to you about, apart from copyright and intellectual property, you also have the performance rights, and the main revenue stream for music apart from this was touring, was playing shows, right?
Yeah. But that's
now
touring
that
revenue isn't included in the music industry. So when you talk about the music industry's annual revenue, it has nothing to do with tours. So my comments here are strictly confined to the music industry, which is the industry and all of the revenue made off of the enforcement of intellectual property rights.
Okay, I get it. So the intangible thing, practically.
Yeah, the
right?
song, right? The music.
Yes, yeah.
That's anything, if Taylor Swift sells a t-shirt, that revenue is not counted in the music industry annual revenue. So it's
But Spotify streams, for instance,
Spotify streams are counted in that. Yeah.
Samo jedan brzi podsjetnik, jer to nekad zaboravim napraviti kad snimam ove videe, a to je da ako imaš još koje pitanje vezano uz ovu temu, ili ako hoćeš da nekad u budućnosti snimimo video o nekoj drugoj temi, slobodno nam napiši u komentare, pa ćemo to probati i napraviti što prije. To je to, nazad na video. Spotify is saying they're going to reduce payouts.
Yeah, well, they're not going to pay
the whole world
money.
is chanting, we want more.
Yeah, they're not going to pay money to people who get less than 1,000. They're not going to pay out royalties on songs that get less than 1,000 streams in a calendar year, which may be illegal, but it's hard to really say.
Well, if you agree to their terms of service, then
right.
I guess it's legal.
Yeah, put it on their platform. So.
Yeah, that's one of the main problems that I see. Like people are, let's say, bitching about social media, streaming platforms, any kind of modern internet tools and platforms to promote and get your music to the listener. And most of them think like because it's free, it's a given. It's something that you have rights on, but you have rights on like the same way you are. Like if you're renting an apartment, you are renting it, and if someone wants to sell it, you're out on the street. And if he wants to change the color of the walls inside, he's got the right to do it if you sign the agreement, right? So,
yeah.
And I'd like to hear your thoughts on Spotify in general. Just a little short snippet. People rely on streaming platforms now, and labels rely on streaming platforms more and more because the revenue that comes in just from rights, from copyrights, is becoming less and less. And streaming rights also, but it's the new thing. Like every year we hear more and more people are streaming music. Wow, such a novel thing. Yeah. And every year it's the same. We have received more and more revenue from streaming, but Spotify is still not a profitable business, a company that's still not profitable.
Yeah.
I'd like for you to explain it in a way that I still can't because you know a lot more about it. So,
well, Spotify is one of the most capable machine learning applications to come along pre, large language models like ChatGPT. They really use artificial intelligence to crack this problem of music curation and recommendation. And that really gave them a competitive edge against Apple Music and Deezer and all these other platforms, because you could go to your Discover Weekly playlist in Spotify and you would actually hear music you've never heard before that you actually like. And that made users really want to use it. It made discovering new music really easy. So I want to give credit there. But yeah, Spotify is not a profitable company. The record labels are able to make a profit. And they're able to continue to do so largely thanks to platforms like Spotify. But Spotify itself doesn't make any money. It actually loses money. And it really relies on continued investment in order to continue operating. So yeah.
Yeah. So basically, it's also a business to business model that relies on capital from the big companies, like the music companies, the labels, and companies like the big bad BlackRock, right?
Well, yeah. So Spotify actually some of its initial like all three major record labels in the US were like day one investors in Spotify. And so they had a large say in the agreements and the negotiations around streaming payouts. And yeah, it's a big conflict of interest. But I would say the real problem with Spotify is not that it's not Spotify's fault that this is a very, like, it's no longer a monetizable racket, you know, getting access to music for a music listener. Really, Spotify, all it does is it stops people from stealing the music, which was happening rampantly before it came along. Because Spotify is so convenient, I pay a fee, I download an app, and then my library is shared between my computer and my phone and anywhere else I want to log in. And not only that, it'll allow me to organize it. It will give me playlists. It will give me new music recommendations. Makes it more convenient than like going and downloading all this music, putting it on all my devices, having it stored locally. So it's a cloud service really for music, and a recommendation engine. And that's really what its appeal is. But yeah, it's kind of a stopgap. It's kind of a way to stop people from outright stealing the music. And you know, they're going to, if Spotify wants to make money, they're going to have to raise their prices continually at some point.
And that's happening continually.
Yeah. And at some point that will become less attractive than stealing music again. If for whatever reason stealing music becomes easier or more convenient again, then people will do it. So yeah.
And on the other hand, we have a big uptake in the last few years of people wanting to buy physical media.
Yeah.
Wanting to buy LPs, CDs, cassettes, like stuff that I used to pirate back in the day from the radio to listen on my Walkman, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not just in music. I've started to follow a lot of the entertainment industry at large. And there's a big like movement of independent creators in every entertainment facet, like movies, like comedy, like comic books, whatever you want, you know.
Yeah.
And people are well, knowingly or unknowingly, do they follow some kind of some kind of framework for their business, or they just get it intrinsically, you know. Okay, I have to get people who like this so I can sell them stuff.
Yeah.
And it works beautifully. If you've ever heard of a guy called Eric July.
I have not.
He is a comic book, well, not artist, but I think he's a writer. And he's, I think, the most successful independent comic book creator now. And he's on his third book, I think, right now. His first book made like $1 million in 2 weeks. The second one made $2 million in a week, all from crowdfunding.
Yeah.
And now he's on his third book. That's he's 2 days in, and he's at $750,000.
Yeah.
Right now, just from being a YouTuber and talking about stuff and putting his creation out there for people to see and to talk about, and naturally getting into all kinds of fights with all kinds of people who think it should be otherwise, and you know, the polarization and the everything. But the fact is that people will pay for something they believe in if they see a value in it.
Yeah. So going back to what you were saying earlier about sort of the B2B scenario, is that like B2B means business to business. There are two types of businesses. There's business to consumer, and then there's business to business. You could argue there's also business to government, but that's a whole other story. Ultimately, the music industry has always passed the buck. You know, eventually someone has to ask a customer, would you like to buy this? Someone has to make an offer to an end user and say, this is the price. This is what you get for that price. Would you like to get it? And the music industry has historically passed the buck on that. They've said, you know, the artist doesn't want to do it, so they get a manager. The manager doesn't want to do it, so they walk the artist into a record label. The record label doesn't want to do it, so they have a distribution arm or a third-party distributor. Distributor doesn't want to do it, so they pass it off to a record store. And right now, that exact same thing is happening, except the record store has been replaced by streaming services, who then ask the customer, do you want this monthly subscription? So I think one of the fundamental problems of the music industry is that nobody wants to offer anyone anything. They all just want to be popular and cool and make a lot of money without actually having to do any selling. But for the people who can go and just make an offer to an end user and do it well and do it repeatedly, there's opportunity, especially as an independent creator. If you can cut out the manager, the record label, the distributor, the publisher, and the record store, and just take all of their fees and collapse it down and say, I'm going to talk to the customer. I'm going to offer them something, and I'm going to reap all the benefit, then there's a huge premium on that. And that's exactly what this gentleman you just described has done. He's foregone the book agent, the book publisher, the book store, taken all their fees out of the equation and said, I'm just going to ask the customer if they want to buy this book. And that's probably the main thing that's wrong in the music industry for artists, is that they're unwilling to go and make their customer an offer. And furthermore, they expect, a lot of the business to be done by a third party, and they expect that they'll just get to sit back and create. But this gentleman you just described didn't do that. He created and he did the business. And that's where I think that's kind of our ethos at Indepreneur. That's what we've always been about. Is like, if you can be the one to make the offer, be the one to run the business, then you actually have a shot at escaping like the sort of death spiral of the music industry.
Absolutely. Achieve that freedom, if you will.
Yeah.
In this capitalist society that we all hate so much. Ok, riješili smo i tu temu. I kaj sad? Jednostavni odgovor, sljedeće pogledaj ovaj video tu negdje. Jer ja se uvijek trudim nekako ih povezati u logičke cjeline ili u nastavke, da ne moraš tražiti po našem kanalu kuda kreneš dalje. To je to. Klikni dalje, pretplati se ako nisi i vidimo se.